In this tutorial we'll have a look at the mConfig program, which is the setup system behind Mistika. To access it, we can either just double click the mConfig icon on the desktop, or in any console we can just type mConfig, note the capital C. Because most things in here are quite technical, the text manual will generally provide a better reference than a video tutorial, but we can have a tour around just to see what goes on in here. So mConfig is tab-based, and when we first access the program we're on the General tab. So as we saw in a quick start guide, the usual reason for coming into mConfig is to choose the resolution that Mistika will master in. So what we're doing when we're choosing something from this list is actually we're choosing a set of presets that will populate many items in the other tabs. And we can create and delete formats for any specific requirements we have. And a tip here is that if you do need to create a new format, start by loading a format that's closest to what you need, because when you create a new format, actually it'll create a clone of it, and then you can just change the few items that you need to change. As we go through the tabs, I won't go through every single item just because the manual does that better, but I'll just point out some specific areas that are quite useful. So another function that's useful on the General tab is to be able to switch Mistika versions. Where you've loaded in new versions of Mistika, here you can very quickly swap between older versions. So for example, if you're a beta tester and you've got the latest version of the software, you might occasionally want to drop back to the old release or vice versa. You can do it very quickly here. Another important aspect actually to know is that changes that you make in mConfig, most of them won't have an effect until you restart Mistika. You don't have to restart the machine, just quit the software and start again. So going along to file paths, this is where we can say where Mistika naturally stores its material. And it's divided into a couple of areas. The upper area is the current way of specifying where the storage paths are. Down below are some areas for historical setups. For example, if you're working on a Mistika that's been upgraded, these are the settings that might work with older projects. Mistika is intended to be as flexible as possible in terms of how and where it stores material, rather than have that material locked to a specific drive. And the idea behind that is to make sure that it's as easy as possible to integrate Mistika into existing workflows, or to create new highly efficient workflows, or to integrate Mistika with other systems and so on. The main function here is the path builder, which allows you to make paths of where files will be stored based on variables. So if I open it, so within the path builder I can already see that I have a number of paths defined. So for example, if I click on this one, I can see that I've defined a path with the shortcut name of render movies, which is for the movies device, which basically means that when I go to the output tab of Mistika and choose to make a movie file, under the targets, one of the options will be render movies. And that's a shortcut for this path here, which has both some fixed directories and also some variables in. So what this will actually do is when I create a movie file, it'll go to my folder, in this case material, render, movies. But then if it doesn't exist already, it will create a directory identical to my project name within Mistika. And then in there it will build the name of the file based on these variables. Render name is the name that I type in into the output to create the file. Segment index is in case I've asked Mistika to do multiple renders, in which case it will be my file 1, my file 2, my file 3 and so on. And then I have the eye variable. For example, if I'm doing stereoscopic work and I'm just rendering the right eye, then that would get switched out for the word right. And then the extension, the natural extension of whatever it is I'm making. So using the path builder and then using these variables, you can create dynamic paths that help you manage your media and make sure that your files end up in a place that fits with your individual workflows. There are 4 devices, if you like, which relate to the 4 different things that you might be rendering from Mistika. The XFS device is where the Mistika JS files, which is its own internal format, reside. So they will need to be on your fast disks, the ones that can support real-time playback. Then your movies go here, and your images go here, and your sound goes here. And each one can be given their own paths. You can also add in multiple paths. So, for example, I actually have two movie devices here. One simply goes to a default location here, where it's not creating a project directory, it's just creating a render file, whereas my other one is creating the project directory and so on. Another useful path here is the global presets directory. Effectively, this is a directory that is shared between every Mistika project. So if you have common effects that you want to use, or common clips that you want to use, for example a countdown clock or a slate or something, then if you were to put it in this directory, it would immediately be available in every project without you having to go and locate it. So moving on to render format, these are obviously the parameters that set precisely what the main system resolution is set to. This information here is worth a read to explain it properly, but essentially when you set Mistika to a given resolution, that's the resolution that the system is optimized to run at. It doesn't affect its input resolution, you can give it anything, but then you would naturally rescale that material to fit with the system resolution. So you generally set this to be your mastering resolution, if you like. Now these are some of the parameters that are populated by the presets. So for example, here we have 1920 by 1080. If I went to my General tab and picked a different resolution, we can now see that that's updated and changed. So a little word of warning here. These general names, whilst they contain an idea of a resolution, they are just names. This could be called My Banana Setup. They are just names, which means that if you have someone who comes along and does this and changes a resolution, then every time that resolution is loaded, so I now go back to the 1080p that I changed, you can see that a user would expect to be getting an HD 1080, but actually this preset has been modified to be something else. So do be slightly aware that if you call a preset by its resolution and then change the resolution to something else, you'll probably make yourself quite unpopular. Other things in this area, obviously frames per second, and the low-res resolution. What this relates to is that Mistika has this ability to drop resolution, if you require it to, on playback. So for example, if you're building some effects that no longer run in real time because there are so many things going on, but you don't want to render it, you just want to quickly see if it's in sync with audio or whatever, you can get Mistika to drop to a user-definable lower resolution, and this is where the user defines that low resolution. So this would be 1/2 of this resolution, or 1/4, or 1/8, and so on. Going on to render options. Lots of things in here for the techies. Basically how to optimize the system depending on how many processors you have and so on. A couple of things at the top that are worth knowing about. Render to video and render to graphics. What these mean are when you are rendering something, you can choose whether you see a visual update of what the system is rendering at the moment and where you see that visual update. With both unticked, you'll just see a little progress bar and nothing else. If you tick render to video, then as the system renders, the external video card will be sent the frames that it's rendering at the moment, so you can see a continual update of what it's doing. Alternatively, if you had render to graphics, the video output will freeze when it's rendering, but you'll see a visual update on your GUI monitor over the timeline. You can have both on if you want. I would say that generally render to video is a useful thing to have on in a client suite, because otherwise when you render, the output monitor freezes and they'll think you're not doing any work. The default render name comes up in output. You'll see that under the automatic naming field. So you can change that if you like to something more friendly. Render farm, again one for the manual, but you can have any number of Mistikas all working together to boost your number crunching. Video I/O, so this is the control for the video board. If you don't have a video board installed on your system, then this needs to be unchecked. If it is checked and you don't have a video board, likely Mistika won't start. Again, just jumping to the highlights. Here you'll notice we have a drop-down list that looks very similar to the list in the General tab. The difference is that under the General tab, we're grabbing a selection of presets of values to populate the other fields. In here, this is specifically telling the video board what resolution to run at. And the interesting thing is that the resolution here under video and the resolution here under render format don't necessarily need to be the same. Of course, in an HD environment or a normal video environment, they would be, because I'd be making 1920 by 1080 and looking at it at 1920 by 1080 on my external video monitor. On the other hand, if I were, for example, working at Red's 4K resolution, which is this, well, in my scenario, I actually only have an HD monitor connected. So in this setup, I would still have my video monitor set to 1920 by 1080 and let the video board then rescale. If I did happen to have a 4K projector lying around, then I might put it up to the quad SDI outputs. If we are using the video board to rescale between our system resolution and our monitor or projector resolution, then the items under multi-mastering are relevant, because here we can say how we get from one resolution to the other, and they're all listed here. So anamorphic will do a straightforward fit to fill between the two resolutions. A crop will do pixel for pixel. So for example, an HD center cutout of a 4K image. Pad would add a letterbox to compensate for any aspect ratio changes, and then we can also have a user defined scaling between the two, and there's a fit X and fit Y to help us, which will go between the different aspect ratios. Under the interface, again, just a couple of options to how do we control the interface, whether or not we're using one or two monitors for our GUI interface is chosen here. There's also some options for the tablet device. Licensing tells you when your license is going to expire. This will allow you to set how many days before that expiration date that Mistika will start to tell you that you want to think about getting another license, unless you have a permanent license, of course. And if you do need a new license, then this is the data you need to send to SGO along with those. SNFS is for SAN storage. If you have multiple Mistikas or multiple systems on a SAN shared network environment, and this is definitely an area for the engineers. Tangent devices, if you have the tangent control surfaces for grading and other controls, then this is how you make sure that they're talking to Mistika. An interesting point here is that you'd expect that you'd have to look for the IP address of the tangent panels and enter them in here. Actually, it's the other way around. You type in here what you want the panel IP addresses to be, and then when Mistika starts up, it finds the panels and tells them what their IP address will be. Under 3D LUTs, the ability to loop a live video from the desktop so that you can run some calibration tools, like for example the light space system. 3D LUTs can then be used within the timeline and color correctors. Under utils, we have a couple of things to help us check real-time performance, find where the Mistika fonts folder is, if you need to install new fonts and so on. And under red, we have some specifics for a default behavior for red files. Actually, all these are controllable within the timeline. So all this section does is allows you to set up a default starting point. For example, you might say that you want to force the gamma curve always to be a particular gamma curve, rather than go into the red parameters on the timeline and change it for each one. If you're doing lots of different projects, it's probably best not to have anything forced on here, because then it makes you make the decision as you go. On the other hand, if you're on a feature film and you've got the next 3 months of handling the same red files, then you might as well put in some defaults to save you some button pressing. So that's a general tour of the sort of things you use mConfig for. In the most part, once your system is set up, the only thing you'll come in here to do is to change your system resolution to be whatever you want it to be. If you make a change to a preset, make sure you save it and next time you start Mistika, all your new values will take effect.